Hey everyone, I'm excited about today's topic. We're almost at full brontosaurus. Definitely full raptor. And I've got Crocodilio with me again. So we're going to talk about my favorite books. I'm mostly into nonfiction, so it's not to say I've not done some fiction reading, like I've read some of the sweeping fantasy novels, like up to like the midway point, and I do like science fiction types of stories, but I really don't have the patience to worry about a long epic tale or even like a regular length novel. So I like short stories, science fiction short stories. There's a collection. It's developed by the estate of L. Ron Hubbard, so it's not attached to that troublesome religion, Scientology, but it promotes science fiction writers. So I got a bunch of those books several years ago, and I'm making my way through them. It's sci-fi short stories, and it's pretty good. So, I mean, I'll start one, and if I don't like it, I abandon it. But it's my casual reading, sci-fi bath time type of book. So if I do take baths, which I do in the wintertime more than in the summer, I like to lay and relax and think about things usually, but then I might take up a book and do some reading. So that pretty much does it for fiction. My book collection is not currently where I live. I have it stored. So, I mean, I just have a handful of books here, just a couple of those sci-fi short story books. It's called Writers from the Future, by the way. Writers of the Future. If you're into sci-fi short stories, it's well regarded. Despite all the bad press about the founding publisher. So anyway, so let's move through some of these nonfiction titles that I really, really love, and the things that have been formative to me. I started university and eventually settled on the philosophy major, and psychology was my minor. So a lot of what I studied had to do with religion and philosophy. So it was totally, extremely important for me to make my way through these books. And study of philosophy and poetry shaped me. I mean, there's not denying it. I mean, I have really, really been influenced and shaped by what I've read, so I'm going to go through it right now. So I like survival types of tomes, things that tell you about how to live in the wilderness and how to make it. These types of skills used to just be passed down because they were necessary, and I love to kind of reflect on that. And I have at periods of my life been somewhat of an outdoorsman and lived in the woods, and for a period of time I lived a few weeks in the forest with about 30 or 40 other people. And I've also camped a lot. I never really got into camping until I was in college, actually, so because my family weren't heavily into camping or anything like that, but my dad was an avid hunter, fisherman, and trapper, so I spent a lot of time going out with him to see what was in his traps, and he sold pelts. He would process foxes and minks and everything and sell the skins. This was a part of my rearing, and I always was into the outdoors in that way, but not really so much going into the woods and camping. So once I got into that in college, I loved it, and I camped. One summer I spent all my free time camping. So I do like survival and frontiersman types of books and things about living in nature and stuff about nature. When I studied ethics in college, I had to learn not only religious ethics, but environmental ethics and other types of, social ethics and things. So I'm interested in nature, and I've done this whole year was my first year as professionally being a landscaper, so I did a lot of landscaping, and I really love gardening as well. And only when I was growing up I had a garden. I was a part of my family's gardening pursuits, but I never really actively tended it. So one year, about five, maybe close to three, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I had a really, really ambitious backyard garden. I spent all my disposable income on it and just developed a, I developed a plot. It was awesome. I had both raised and in-ground beds, and maybe I'll post a video about one of the tours. The best one was an August tour when everything was in full effect. Alright, so some of the ones I can point to that I like that are nature-esque types of tomes. I liked Into the Wild just as a casual read. And I really liked Alone in the Wilderness, which was a document of a guy who lived in Alaska. You can look up that film, but his journals were listed and published under a different title, and they were edited, but you can also get the unedited journal entries of the guy. And the one I read recently, about a year ago, was called An Island to Myself, and it was about a guy who went twice to live on a very small island, and just all of his thoughts about, you know, being near starvation and not being able to even consider eating one more tiny piece of coconut, but he had to survive. So that was good. And speaking of gardening, I love gardening books. When I was actively gardening, I probably checked out from the university library at least 100 books and just spent a lot of time and effort learning about gardening techniques. So the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, which I was lucky enough to visit, they were closing the gates. They weren't going to let me in. It was past the time to let the public in. But I showed up and I was like, please let me walk through the garden. So they let me in for free, actually, and I scoured the zones. Like, I walked back and forth and zigzagged through the gardens as much as I could. It was not really very lush because it was so cold, but so they released a line of slim volumes that were very excellent, and I read a bunch of those when I was learning to garden. And they were well done and succinct, which I liked. And the American Horticultural Society overall has created good volumes. Actually, they have two really thick volumes of gardening lore. One of them is mostly words. It's the strict facts. And then the other one, equally thick, I mean really like this thick, it's got a lot more pictures and it's for a little bit more of a casual type of gardener. So I preferred the one with all the real info, the words. I don't really remember what it was called, but it's just probably the American Horticultural Society Guide to Gardening. If you're into gardening, that's really worth it to have it. It's pretty much your go-to book, one book. Okay, now also we're going to move into some other nonfiction now. I like practical wisdom quotables. That's how I've jotted it down here. I am really one for terse types of things, just very quick, direct, and to the point information. I don't have a lot of time to just sort of languidly enjoy a bunch of flowery language. When I want the facts, I really want the facts immediately, right? So I like types of quotes, really, that will get straight to the point. So in that vein, I like the humorist, or the witticist, I guess, Ambrose Bierce. He did one called The Devil's Dictionary that was an awesome little witty, quotable sort of like tome. And I've got a bunch of these, but I don't, since I said it, I mean, I don't have my library here of books. And it's not really that many. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe I've got only 1,000 books, but I've had several more, but I mean, I've often weeded them and given them away or sold them. So, I mean, I've hung on to like maybe probably the 1,000 that I really found important to me. And as far as the wisdom, I really love the writer Tiruvayuvar wrote something called The Chorale, and this really just segues into, I suppose, my next collection of books. But he wrote. It was segmented into 3 segments, and it was like how to function in society, and one was how people should be governed, and one of them was like I don't know, practical advice or something. But it was great because they were couplets. All right, I guess I'm finally getting to the point. They were amazing little couplets, and he would do about, maybe it was a dozen or more couplets on each topic. And the first one was God, and then the next one I think was rain, and then he did one about almost everything, like family life, relationships, and all of the sort of things that people would be interested in the ancient world. So the history that I like is mostly about sort of a medieval period and things that would have to do with the way people live their everyday life in ancient times. So the Chorale by Tiryu Valuvar is amazing, and I have referenced it and kept it around me for many years. So I believe he was a Near East philosopher and also a poet. So things from antiquity, you would never really know the actual source, but we will now move into Near East philosophers and poets. And I'm a huge fan of them. So I'll just mention a few names. Rumi, everyone knows about, and he's a master, of course. There's one poet called Allama Prabhu, and he came from a collection of poets from, I guess they were translated from Sanskrit, and there were 4 poets in the volume, and he was the very best of all by far. Just like I like, just short, loaded poems that you can really unfold into a million different sort of things. And he was always talking about the Lord of Caves, and I was super into that because I was super into caving, and the more I thought about it and reflected, the more I liked his poetry. Alright, so also Idris Shah, he was a writer, he would document Sufi mysticism and the, I guess the habits and philosophy and teaching practices of the Sufi mystics. And that was very interesting, the way that they would do their teaching and the way that they would recruit and all of their ideas. They are universal types of ideas, and you'll find, I like how you will find similar thoughts in a lot of different veins and a lot of different world texts, but the way that they would tell their stories and the way that you could unfold these lessons out of the stories is very interesting. And he did a great, I guess he wrote dozens of books, but I had one in particular where he was talking about the individual schools of Sufism and their different tactics, their different teaching styles and stories. Okay, and a poet I like is Fadil Al-Azawi. He's living. He's maybe in his 70s, I don't know, but he has published a lot of works, and he had an amazing poem called something about the dancer, but it was started like wine in the cups, and he sees the blaze of the forest in her eyes or something. And he, I didn't really study his works too much, but he won me over with the power of a couple of his poems. And he is an awesome modern living poet, Fadil Al-Azawi. And Hafiz, I like a lot. So, I had a dream one time about a bird with feathery, rainbow-colored plumage in the front yard of the house where I grew up. And I went outside the front door, and he was perched in the tree, kind of right in front of the front door, and he was giving me advice or something. And then that I found later, or I guess I remembered that it was a part of a poem by Hafiz, I think. So, and I actually like him quite a lot. Let's back up just a little bit. So I also like philosophy, of course, because that was my major, and mostly ancient philosophy. My program, being an undergrad program, didn't feature too much of the modern contemporary philosophers, so just getting that firmament of all the old guys was, of course, incredibly valuable to me, and everyone should study that stuff. Everyone should study it, and I liked especially the Stoics, and Epicureans, so that was just Epicurus basically, but Epictetus was one of my favorites, and his sentiments, I believe, are the most valuable to me from the whole world of philosophy. He has one slim volume, it's his handbook. It's called like the Enchiridion or something, but it is a great volume. You can read it in one tubby. You can take one bath and read the entire thing, which I've done before, and it's a great handbook of practical wisdom about how to correctly think about your surroundings and how to form your opinions and base how it's best to function in the world. It's his ideas about it, but I think that everyone could gain something from it. So Epictetus favorite philosophers. And then I could go into all the other guys, but he's the only one who's had a really resounding effect on me, and I've remembered and cared about his philosophy since university. Alright, now for poetry, also one of my favorites, I especially like the following poets. Baudelaire, awesome, The Flowers of Evil. William Blake, pretty much everything that Blake released. Oh, and incidentally, one of the modern 60s beat poets, I forgot which one he was, but he did some versions of Blake poetry set to kind of up-tempo, folk-sounding tunes with whistle accompaniment. I should look that up, but that's I love William Blake. I think his poems were also subject to kind of some almost classically orchestrated arrangements that I have gathered over the years. But Blake, definitely a favorite. It's tough to unfold what Blake's all about, but it yields some good results. Christina Rossetti is another of my favorites. There were certain points when her sentiments were just ringing clear in my mind like a bell. And Carl Sandburg, one of my favorites, a real poet's poet. I love Sandburg, and I especially like, I guess, Chicago Poems, but he has another volume. And a lot of this stuff is so cheap, you can get it off Dover Publications, and you can have a library of stuff so cheap. And I used to browse their publications at a local bookstore. That's how I found a lot of this stuff, and also from poetry class, etc. But Sandburg. For the Far East, let's think about some religious texts that were very important during my formative years. I especially liked both Suzukis, that's D.T. Suzuki and Shunryu Suzuki, who D.T. was more of a strict sort of a scholar of Zen Buddhism, and I did papers on Zen, so I had to read, I probably read in one semester like 50 Zen books, but his stood out as being very clear and thoughtful. And also Shunryu Suzuki is a little bit more practical application, I guess, in a modern way, and he's got one famous book. That's it. That's just it. That's what he released. And Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, a very famous author and speaker. And I remember sitting in the library one time at the university, gazing out the window, reading one of his books, and getting the greatest sense of warmth and peace. He is a great speaker and writer, and everyone should have some of his works in their home library. Since it's a great combination, Buddhist thought and poetry, I love haiku, especially Basho, who did travel guides, travel logs, as well as stricter haiku. And those are good. And also, I think my favorite haiku poet is Issa. That's Issa. Let's see, there was one, I liked the Pillow Book. I think the author's name was Sei Shagan or something, and she just wrote her thoughts. She was a girl who was involved in one of the courts of the royalty in that period, and she just wrote her thoughts down, and it's just a real sort of like, it's a nice collection of the lists she made and her thoughts about what was going on in the royal court and in her life. And I read once that they made a movie about it, but I had that for a long while. And also there's one called As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams. This was another travelogue which was popular in the period, and it was by a female, and she was called, well, at least history remembers her as Lady Sarashina, and she did an awesome travelogue about her thoughts and some of the suffering she dealt with and how she felt about most things. Okay, and let's see here. Lao Tzu, of course, he wrote the very famous Tao Te Ching, and another book that it takes a long time to really unfold, but once you have gotten to be aware of what it's pointing towards, you will find that your personal understanding of the book will take form, and I love the well, that is pretty much the pinnacle of Taoist literature, and there was a lot of people like Chuang Tzu who came later and did some study about it. But it's a small volume. Get a hold of one of the translations, a translation that you like, and study it, because it's pretty important stuff, and it really unfolds quite nicely if you start considering the real specifics of the Tao Te Ching. So let's see here. And also another poet I love from the Far East, Li Po. He was a drunken poet who was writing about drunkenness of all kinds. And his famous poem, I like all of his stuff. I have a volume of it. There were two poets. They were contemporaries of one another, and I forgot the other one. I think it's Tu Fu, but Li Po and Tu Fu. Li Po, way better. I'm not sure which one the scholars think was the most popular, or which one's the most popular today. But Li Po was definitely my dude. And I think his most famous one is Drinking Alone with the Moon. And I found like 5 or 6 translations of it. And of course I had favorites among those translations, so I kind of just one time I crafted my favorite, or my own translation based on all those. And I don't know what happened to that. I probably got it saved somewhere, but that's a good one. Everything Li Po wrote was good. And of course Confucius. Good, stable, sturdy lore. Wise advice. He wrote about governments and how society should function. Some good practical knowledge. I think a lot of it was stuff that his students wrote, which I guess was common in a lot of the writings from antiquity that we've received. But definitely worth a read and some thought, Confucius. Alright, so let's see here. And then I guess I do like Camus, or Camus. So I read a couple of his books and was really inspired by it. I think I read The Fall and The Plague, and maybe part of another one, or maybe another full one. But I liked that guy. I still like that guy. And I like one particular book I'll mention. This is just one off. It's by Max Frisch. And his book that I enjoyed a lot was called Man in the Holocene. This is also kind of a fast read, and it's about one man and his thoughts while he lives alone in a cabin, and he's reaching an advanced age, and it's written very well. It's an unorthodox telling, but that one is highly recommended by me. I enjoyed it. I need to revisit it, really. I just read it once. Okay, and also like Henry Miller, I remember laughing out loud, cackling when I read part of Black Spring. There was a portion about a horse. I'm not sure if I would get that same sensation now, but I think I only really own Tropic of Cancer, so I don't know about his other material. But I just like that stuff. And also rock star autobiographies, especially autobiographies. For a while I had access to a bunch of them, and I read a bunch of them. I've read them from all the sort of subgenres of rock music, pop music, everyone from, well, the hard rockers to soft rockers, without mentioning names, but that's always entertaining because it's just worth it. Actually, I should probably get a big stack of those and start reading them again. And as far as, well, I'll mention some other religious works to round it all out. Some Christian books I like that have influenced me are The Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross, and Ecclesiastes, Psalms, and Proverbs. Those are my 3 favorite books from the Bible. And those are my favorite books. So thanks for joining me on this journey, and may your day be filled with happiness. All right. Thank you.